You know, my dear friends, after 75 years of life, I've learned that positivity is like that fresh coffee I prepare every morning. The more you share, the better it tastes. Let me tell you how I discovered this. It was 1985. I had just lost my job at the factory where I had worked for 25 years. At that time, I had 3 children to raise, and the bills kept piling up. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting on the porch with that weight in my heart, when my 4-year-old granddaughter, little Emma, came running with a flower from the garden she had just picked. "Grandpa, this is so you won't be sad," she said, with that toothless smile that only children have. That's when I realized, even in the most difficult moments, there's always something to smile about. From that day on, I began to change my way of seeing things. When the bus was late, instead of complaining, I would take the opportunity to talk to other people at the stop. You can't imagine how many interesting stories I heard. There was a time when I met Mr. Thompson, who later became my partner in the bakery I opened. Oh, the bakery, it was my new beginning. Even without experience, I decided that each bread that came out of there would carry a bit of joy. I started greeting all customers with a sincere smile. At first, some didn't even respond, but with time, the bakery became the neighborhood's meeting point. People came not just for the bread, but for the coffee and good conversation. There was a lady, Mrs. Roberts, who always arrived looking grumpy. Every day I would say, "Good morning, Mrs. Roberts. You look even more beautiful today." Initially, she would just grumble, but after a few months, she started smiling back. One day she told me she lived alone, and that greeting was the only kindness she received during the entire day. That's why I say, positivity isn't about pretending everything is okay when it's not. It's about choosing to see the good side of things, even when it seems like it doesn't exist. It's like my late wife Elizabeth always used to say, "Jack, life is like a cake recipe. Even if an ingredient is missing, you can make something delicious if you add love." Today, at 75, I'm proud to say that layoff was one of the best things that happened to me. The bakery is now in the hands of my eldest son, but I still go there every morning to have my coffee and distribute smiles. The oldest customers bring their grandchildren, and some even call me the bread grandpa. And do you know what else I learned? That positivity is contagious. When I smile at someone in the elevator, I almost always receive a smile back. When I compliment the pharmacy clerk's work, she attends the next customer with more attention. It's like throwing a pebble in a lake. The waves spread, touching places we can't even imagine. Of course, there are difficult days. Days when arthritis tightens, when the loneliness of missing Elizabeth weighs heavy, when the news headlines steal our sleep. But even on these days, I make sure to get up, get dressed, and find something to be grateful for. Sometimes it's the birdsong by the window. Other times it's a surprise call from a grandchild, or even managing to tie my own shoes. Something that's getting increasingly difficult, you know. The secret is to start slowly. You don't need to go around hugging everyone, especially in these times. Start with a smile in the mirror in the morning, then a good morning to the doorman. Maybe a sincere compliment to the neighbor who always takes care of the building's plants. These are small gestures that together make all the difference. Positivity is like planting a tree. At first you see no results, but if you continue watering it every day, eventually it grows and provides shade for everyone. And look, at my age I can say that I've planted many such trees, and the shade they cast today is my greatest joy. When I was younger, I thought I knew everything. I would talk non-stop, interrupt people mid-sentence, always wanting to tell my own story. Oh, how foolish I was. It took a special event to teach me the value of truly listening. It was 1992, and I already had the bakery well established when my middle son, Robert, started behaving differently. He had always been a cheerful boy, but he became quiet, withdrawn. Everyone said, "It's just a phase, Jack, it'll pass." But something inside me said there was more to it. One day, after closing the bakery, instead of going straight home as I always did, I sat with him in the small park across the street. I didn't say anything, just sat there watching people pass by. After a while, he started talking. He told me about being teased at school because of his thick glasses, about being afraid of failing the school year, about missing his mother. Elizabeth was very busy taking care of my sick mother-in-law at the time. In that moment, I did something different from what I usually did. Instead of giving advice or telling him how much harder things were in my time, I just listened. I paid attention to each word, each sigh. When he spoke, I would nod, sometimes asking a question to understand better. You should have seen how his eyes lit up, having someone truly interested in what he was feeling. After that day, I made it a habit. At the bakery, I began to notice that each customer who entered had a story to tell. Mrs. Johnson wasn't just buying bread. She was buying bread for her grandson who was visiting after months. Mr. Garcia wasn't complaining about the price for no reason. He had lost his job and was worried about feeding his family. I especially remember a day in 1998. There was a new young woman in the neighborhood who would come buy a small coffee at the end of the day. She would barely make eye contact, always in a hurry. One day I noticed she was quietly crying while waiting in line. Instead of pretending I didn't see, as many people would do, I asked if she would like to sit for a moment. "I don't want to bother," she said. "My dear," I responded, "sometimes a friendly ear is the best medicine." She sat down and for 2 hours told me about how she had moved to the big city, dreaming of a better life, but was feeling alone and lost. I didn't give any advice, I just listened. In the end, she hugged me and said, "Mr. Jack, you are the first person who has truly listened to me since I arrived here." Over time, I realized that truly listening is a gift we give to others and to ourselves. When Elizabeth became ill in 2010, I spent many nights just holding her hand, listening to her old stories, her fears, her hopes. Each of her words was precious, and I regret the times I was too busy to listen. These days, people sometimes think that because I'm old, I have nothing to contribute. But you know what I've discovered? The more I listen, the more people want to listen to me, too. My grandchildren love to sit with me because they know I'll truly pay attention to their stories, without looking at my phone or interrupting. One thing I learned is to pay attention to details. When my youngest granddaughter tells me about her day at school, I don't just nod my head. I ask about that friend she mentioned last week. I remember the name of the teacher she said was nice. Her little eyes light up when she realizes Grandpa really paid attention to what she told me before. Just last week, I was at the bank waiting my turn when a gentleman next to me started talking about how difficult it was to deal with modern technology. Instead of simply agreeing, I turned my body towards him, looked him in the eyes, and asked exactly what he was finding complicated. We spent almost an hour talking, and in the end he said, "How good to find someone who still knows how to have a real conversation." The secret to active listening, I learned, is in the small gestures. Maintaining eye contact, turning your body towards the speaker, making small confirmation sounds to show you're following along, and most importantly, not thinking about what we're going to say while the person is still talking. That's the hardest part. But with practice, we learn. Sometimes at family gatherings, I just observe. The younger ones with their cell phones barely look each other in the eyes. They talk at the same time, interrupt each other. When I manage to get everyone together for coffee, I make sure to create an environment where each person has their turn to speak, where stories can be told in full, where memories can be shared without rush. Listening is an act of love, my dears. It's telling the other person you are important, your story matters, your feelings are valid. And the more we practice, the more natural it becomes. It's like that old saying my father always repeated, "God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, to listen more and speak less." You know, there's one thing I learned in my 75 years of life. A good conversation can change someone's day, sometimes even an entire life. I'm not talking about superficial chat about the weather or soap operas, although that has its place too. I'm talking about genuine conversations, the ones that stay in memory. I remember it as if it were yesterday. It was 1970. I had just married Elizabeth and was desperately looking for a job. I went into a simple cafe to have a coffee, trying to save the little money I had. That's when I met Mr. Thompson, an older gentleman sitting alone at the counter. We started talking about coffee. He had been a coffee farmer in the Midwest. But the conversation went beyond that. He told me about the difficulties he had faced in life, how he lost everything in the 1955 frost, and how he rebuilt his life from scratch. It wasn't just the story itself that marked me, but the way he told it. He had a wisdom in his words, a way of sharing experiences that made me see my own situation with different eyes. "Jack," he told me, "life is like coffee. Sometimes it seems bitter, but if you know how to prepare it, you'll find a special flavor." That conversation changed my perspective. I left not only with practical advice about where to look for a job, but with renewed hope. Years later, when I opened my bakery, I made sure to create an environment that favored good conversations. I put in some small tables, bought a coffee pot that was always full, and made that space more than just a business. It was a meeting point, a place where stories were shared. One of my joys was seeing how conversations developed naturally. There was the group of retirees who met every morning. We called them the Muffin Club. They would discuss everything: politics, football, old stories about the city. But the most beautiful thing was seeing how they supported each other. When Mr. Garcia lost his wife, it was there, between one coffee and another, that he found the strength to move forward. I learned that a good conversation is like a dance. It needs rhythm, space, and harmony. You have to know when to speak and when to listen. Over time, I developed some techniques that always work well. First, I learned to ask questions that open doors. Instead of asking, "How are you?" which usually leads to a simple "fine," I ask, "How was your weekend?" or "What has been making you happy lately?" These are questions that invite the person to share more. I remember a time in 2005 when a regular customer, Mrs. Peterson, seemed especially dejected. Instead of ignoring her, I asked, "What story might your coffee cup be telling today?" She smiled, surprised by the different question, and began to unburden herself about the difficulties she was having with her teenage son. It turned into a 2-hour conversation, with other customers participating, each sharing their experiences as mothers. Another important thing I learned is to value different perspectives. When my grandchildren visit me, I make sure to listen to their video games and social media, even if I don't understand much. In return, I share stories from my youth about how life was without television, how we had fun at street parties. It's a rich exchange where everyone learns. Elizabeth, my late wife, was a master at making people feel comfortable talking. She had a special way of looking people in the eyes, of showing genuine interest. After she passed away in 2015, I realized even more the value of these true connections. One of the most beautiful things that happened at the bakery was the Neighborhood Stories project. It started by chance on a rainy afternoon in 2008, when some customers began telling how the neighborhood used to be. It became a monthly meeting where the oldest residents shared their memories. The most interesting part was that young people started showing up too, curious to learn about the history of the place where they lived. There's a special story I'll never forget. It was 2012, and a young man entered the bakery visibly troubled. His name was Michael. I noticed he needed to talk and offered him a coffee. He began to speak about how he was thinking of giving up on everything. He had lost his job, his girlfriend had broken up with him, and he was feeling like a failure. Instead of giving ready-made advice, I shared my own story of new beginnings, of how the bakery was born from a difficult moment. Other customers who were there began to participate in the conversation, each telling their own stories of overcoming challenges. Michael left different that day. Today he has his own business and always says that conversation at the bakery changed the course of his life. And so I go on, transforming small moments into great connections. Sometimes, when I see people today all stuck to their cell phones, I think about how much they're missing. Nothing can replace the warmth of a good conversation, the sparkle in the eyes of someone telling a story with passion, the sincere laugh that naturally emerges when stories are shared. As my oldest grandson says, "Grandpa, you're like an analog influencer." I'm not quite sure what that means, but if it means I can touch people's hearts through words, then I'm happy to be that. Oh, laughter. You know, I always say that after 70, if we don't learn to laugh at ourselves, life becomes too heavy. And I learned that in the most unexpected way possible. It was 2018, I was 69 and proudly sporting my first smartphone. My grandchildren had insisted so much that I finally gave in. One Sunday morning, I was trying to take a selfie, a modern word they taught me, in the bathroom mirror. I wanted to show the family how elegant I looked in my new suit since we were going to have a special lunch. Well, it happened that I hadn't quite gotten the hang of the selfie. I accidentally pressed the recording button and spent a good 5 minutes talking to the mirror, thinking I was taking a photo, making poses and everything. I only discovered I had recorded a video when my grandson Peter picked up my phone to help me and found the recording. At first I was dying of embarrassment, but when I saw everyone laughing, not at me but with me, I ended up laughing too. The video became a sensation in the family. To this day, when we're all together, someone always asks, "Grandpa, Tell the bathroom mirror video story. That's when I realized, the older we get, the more important it is not to lose our sense of humor. At the bakery, I always made sure to keep the environment cheerful. There was a customer, Mr. Wilson, who would ask me every day, "So, Mr. Jack, is the bread hot today?" And I would always respond, "Not just hot, Mr. Wilson, it's on fire." It was a silly joke, but it became our tradition, our way of starting the day with a smile. Once in 2020, during that difficult pandemic time, when everything was closed and fear was in the air, I started making deliveries wearing an apron my granddaughter had decorated with smiley faces. People found it funny to see a 71-year-old man fully masked, but with a colorful apron delivering bread. This is to ensure that besides bread, you also receive a dose of joy, I would say. Oh, and there was that time when I went dancing foro with the senior group. It was 2019. I had been a widower for a few years and was somewhat resistant to going out. My friends from the gymnastics group convinced me to go. Right on the first song, I tripped over my own feet and fell sitting down. Instead of being embarrassed, I stood up and said, "Folks, I was just missing the floor." Everyone laughed. And that moment that could have been traumatic became a funny story I tell to this day. And do you know what else I learned? That humor has the power to disarm tense situations. At the bakery, when a customer arrived nervous, complaining about the price or the service, I always tried to find a way to lighten the atmosphere. "Look," I would say, "if the bread is expensive, it's because it's like me, getting more valuable with age." There are also situations with my memory problems, which, I confess, sometimes scare me. The other day I entered the kitchen and completely forgot what I had gone there to do. My daughter, worried, asked if everything was okay. I responded, "Everything's great. I'm just making a tourist visit to the refrigerator." She laughed, I laughed, and that moment of concern transformed into something light. One of my joys is playing with my great-grandchildren. I have 3, and they love it when I do different voices to tell stories. One day I was telling the story of the 3 little pigs and started coughing right when the wolf was supposed to blow. It was unintentional, but the children found it so funny that now they always ask, "Grandpa, tell the story of the asthmatic wolf." Humor also helped me through the most difficult moments. When I lost Elizabeth, I thought I would never be able to smile again, but it was precisely the funny memories, like when she burned the cake on our wedding anniversary and we turned it into an improvised pizza, that helped me move forward. Actually, I think humor is a form of wisdom. It's knowing that life doesn't have to be perfect to be good. As I tell my grandchildren, life is like cheese bread. Even when it comes out a bit flat, it's still delicious. Today, at 75, I make sure to start each day looking for something to smile about. Sometimes it's the newspaper with its absurd news. Other times it's the funny stickers my grandchildren send on WhatsApp, which I'm still learning to use. And when someone says I'm too old for something, I respond, "Old is the wind which you can't even see and still makes noise." Of course, there are difficult days. Days when arthritis tightens, when loneliness weighs heavy, when the limitations of age become more evident. But even on these days, I try to find something to laugh about. Like when I went to the doctor to complain about back pain, and he asked if I had fallen recently. "No, doctor," I responded. "It's just that I've carried the weight of years on my back, and now it's charging rent." The secret, I discovered, is not to take yourself too seriously. It's about laughing at your own stumbles, celebrating small victories, like managing to open that jam jar without help, and turning difficult moments into funny stories to tell later. As I always say, life is like my bread dough. The more you knead it, the more it grows. But if you add a little bit of laughter yeast, it becomes much lighter. You know, my dear friends, maintaining one's appearance after 60 isn't about vanity, it's about self-respect. I learned this from my father, who, even working in the fields, would always shave every Sunday and keep a special outfit for going to church. But it was a particular event that made me truly understand the importance of this. It was 2016, I was already a widower for a year, and had somewhat let myself go. I was walking around with an unshaven beard, wrinkled clothes, hair needing a cut. I thought that since I was alone, it didn't matter. Until the day my granddaughter Julia, then 12 years old, came home crying because some classmates had made fun of her sloppy grandfather. That hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about me, it was about how I affected the people I loved. That same afternoon, I picked up the old photo album and found a picture of myself with Elizabeth from when we were young. How well I used to dress. The next day I woke up early and went to the neighborhood barber, Tony, who had known me for years. "Mr. Jack," he exclaimed, "I thought you had changed barbers." After the haircut and shave, it was like I had taken 10 years off my back. I stopped by the clothing store and bought 2 new shirts and dress pants. They weren't anything expensive, but they were clothes that made me feel dignified. The most interesting thing was seeing how people started treating me differently. At the bakery, customers began to chat with me like before. In the senior gymnastics group, I even received some interested looks from some ladies, but that's a story for another day. I created a routine. Every day I wake up at 6 a.m., take a good shower, shave, now only every 2 days as the skin can't handle it every day, carefully comb my hair, even with less than I would like. I choose my clothes the day before, always checking if they're clean and pressed. I have a system of organizing clothes by color in the closet, something I learned from Elizabeth and maintained. One thing I make sure to do is take care of my shoes. My father always said, "Son, a man is known by the shoes he wears." Every night before going to bed, I clean my shoes and organize them for the next day. It might seem like an exaggeration, but this ritual brings me a sense of order, of things being in their place. In 2019, I had a serious knee problem and needed to use a cane. At first I felt embarrassed, thinking the cane made me look older and fragile, until my grandson, Peter, who is a designer, surprised me with a cane he decorated himself, all elegant, with my name engraved. "Grandpa, this isn't a crutch, it's a style accessory," he said. It completely changed my perspective. About clothes, I learned that it doesn't need to be anything expensive or fashionable. The important thing is to be clean and well maintained. I have my favorite shirts, all cotton, which is fresher for our climate, and I always keep them in good condition. When something starts to look worn or stained, I don't insist on wearing it. As my daughter says, "Dad, old clothes age anyone." Another thing I discovered is the importance of perfume. Not those very strong ones that make everyone dizzy, but a pleasant scent. I have a cologne I've been using for years, a gift from my children. Every time I apply it, I remember Elizabeth saying it was her favorite smell. It's funny how an aroma can carry so much memory, isn't it? There's also the matter of posture. Even with age weighing on my back, I make sure to keep myself upright when I walk. I do exercises every day, those the doctor prescribed, and try to always sit with a straight spine. It's not easy, sometimes it hurts, but it makes all the difference in the way I feel and how people see me. One of the most gratifying things is when one of my grandchildren asks for advice about what to wear to a job interview or an important event. The other day, John, my oldest grandson, came to ask me which tie to wear to a wedding. I sat with him and taught him how to tie the knot, just the same way my father taught me over 60 years ago. Sometimes I meet some friends my age who say it's no longer worth taking care of themselves, that their time has passed. I completely disagree. The more age advances, the more important it is to maintain our dignity. It's not about looking younger, it's about respecting yourself and respecting others. I keep a large mirror in my bedroom, a gift from my children. Every morning before going out, I look at myself and do a complete check: clothes, hair, beard, posture. I'm not looking for a 30-year-old man in the reflection. I'm looking for the best version of the 75-year-old man that I am. As I always tell my grandchildren, we may not control the age we have, but we can control how we present ourselves to the world. And when someone comments that I look younger than my age, I respond with a smile. It's not the age that matters, it's the care. You know, there's something I only understood after 60. Being authentic is the greatest gift we can give ourselves. Can't I learned this lesson in the most unexpected way possible? For years at the bakery, I tried to be that serious businessman I thought I needed to be. I wore suits and ties even in the heat, spoke difficultly, tried to imitate the way businessmen looked on television. Oh, how foolish I was. It took a special event to teach me the value of truly being myself. It was 1992, and I already had the bakery well established when my middle son, Robert, started behaving differently. He had always been a cheerful boy, but he became quiet, withdrawn. Everyone said, "It's just a phase, Jack, it'll pass." But something inside me said there was more to it. One day, after closing the bakery, instead of going straight home as I always did, I sat with him in the small park across the street. I didn't say anything, just sat there watching people pass by. After a while, he started talking. He told me about being teased at school because of his thick glasses, about being afraid of failing the school year, about missing his mother. Elizabeth was very busy taking care of my sick mother-in-law at the time. In that moment, I did something different from what I usually did. Instead of giving advice or telling him how much harder things were in my time, I just listened. I paid attention to each word, each sigh. When he spoke, I would nod, sometimes asking a question to understand better. You should have seen how his eyes lit up, having someone truly interested in what he was feeling. After that day, I made this a habit. At the bakery, I began to notice that each customer who entered had a story to tell. Mrs. Thompson wasn't just buying bread. She was buying bread for her grandson who was visiting after months. Mr. Rodriguez wasn't complaining about the price for no reason. He had lost his job and was worried about feeding his family. In 2012, when I turned 63, my children wanted to throw a fancy party at a city restaurant. I thanked them, but proposed something different. A barbecue in our backyard the way we always did. I invited bakery friends, neighbors, everyone together. It was the best party I'd ever had. People from all social classes, ages and styles, united by the simplicity and authenticity of the moment. One of the most difficult things was accepting my limitations with age. For a while I pretended I could still carry flour sacks alone, that my vision was still good enough to do accounts without glasses. It was my late wife, Elizabeth, who helped me understand that there was no shame in asking for help. "Jack," she told me one day, "you don't need to be Superman. You need to be yourself, with your strengths and weaknesses." After she passed away in 2015, these words gained even more meaning. I began to accept my limitations better, and surprisingly, people began to respect me even more for it. There's a funny story about authenticity that happened in 2018. I was at a neighborhood business event where everyone was presenting about turnover, goals, and those kinds of things. When it was my turn, I simply said, "I'm Jack from the bakery. I've been making bread for 40 years, and my greatest pride is seeing my customers' smiles when they smell the bread coming out of the oven." Some people laughed, others were embarrassed. But at the end of the event, several came to talk to me, saying how refreshing it was to see someone so sincere and direct. One of them even confessed that he was tired of pretending to be something he wasn't. With my grandchildren, I make sure to be completely honest. When they ask me about death, about fears, about regrets, I respond with sincerity. Of course, adapting the language to their age, but never lying. Peter, my oldest grandson, told me the other day, "Grandpa, that's why we trust you so much. We know you'll always tell the truth, even when it's not easy." One of the most liberating things about old age is not needing to impress anyone anymore. When I was younger, I was always worried about what others would think. Today, at 75, I know the most important thing is to be at peace with myself. If I want to sing while making bread, I sing. If I want to dance in the rain with my great-grandchildren, I dance. Life is too short to live for others' approval. At the bakery, I transformed this authenticity into a trademark. Customers know that if the bread isn't good one day, I'll be the first to say so. If I make a mistake, I admit it immediately. This created a trust relationship that no expensive marketing could buy. Nowadays, when someone asks me the secret to success, I answer, "Be true." There's no greater happiness than being able to look in the mirror and recognize who you truly are. As I tell my grandchildren, being authentic is like making bread. The more natural, the tastier it becomes. And you know what's most beautiful? Seeing how this authenticity inspires others. I have customers who have changed how they run their own businesses after seeing how sincerity works at the bakery. I have grandchildren who have learned to defend their opinions and choices, even when different from the majority. As the old saying goes that my father always repeated, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." I just add, and the older you get, the more important it is to be true. After all, we no longer have time to waste pretending to be who we are not. Funny how life goes around. When I was young, I could hardly wait to get older to seem more mature. Now at 75, I see so many people fighting against time, as if aging were a kind of defeat. But let me tell you how I learned to embrace each wrinkle, each white hair, each mark that time has left. It was 2019, I was organizing some old boxes in the attic when I found an old photo album. I had photos of myself from when I was young until more recently. I sat right there on the dusty floor and spent hours looking at each image. I saw the Jack of 20, full of dreams, the one of 30, holding my first child, the one of 40, opening the bakery, the one of 50, dancing with Elizabeth at her birthday. Each photo told a story, and each wrinkle on my current face represented one of these stories. The deep line on my forehead? It appeared when I spent nights taking care of my sick children. The crow's feet around my eyes? They're from laughing so much with my grandchildren. That scar on my chin? From the day I learned to ride a bicycle back when I was 8 years old. Once in 2020, during the pandemic, I was doing a video call with my granddaughter Maria, and she commented, "Grandpa, your hair is all white now." For a moment I felt that little stab of wounded vanity, but then I responded, "You know, sweetheart, each white hair here is a story I can tell you. Want to hear some?" We spent the entire afternoon like that, me telling stories from my life, connecting each mark of time to a special memory. In the end, she said something I'll never forget. "Grandpa, I want to get old, just like you, full of stories to tell." At the bakery, I've always had customers of all ages. There's the older crowd who comes every day to buy French bread and chat. And there are the young people who sometimes look at me with a mix of curiosity and respect. One day, a young man asked me how I could work so much at my age. I responded, "My son, I don't work despite my age. I work better because of it." Each year taught me something new about making bread. Of course, aging brings challenges. My joints hurt more than they would like. I need glasses to read even the most common newspaper, and sometimes I forget where I put my keys. They're usually in my pocket. But each limitation taught me something new. When I started having difficulty carrying flour sacks, I learned to delegate tasks and give more responsibilities to younger employees. When my vision started to fail, I developed other senses. Today I know when bread is ready just by its smell and dough texture. One of the most beautiful things about age is the freedom it brings. I no longer worry so much about what others think. If I want to dance in the rain with my great-grandchildren, I dance. If I want to take a nap after lunch, I take it without guilt. If I want to eat that extra piece of dessert, I eat it, but don't tell the doctor. In 2021, I decided to do something different. I started teaching baking classes for neighborhood youth. At first, some seemed skeptical. What could an old man teach about modern bread-making techniques? But soon they realized that experience has its value. As I always say, you can find the recipe on the internet, but the feeling of the right dough point only years of practice can teach. There was a particularly special moment last year. I was celebrating my 75th birthday, and my grandchildren prepared a photo presentation. On each image, they had written a lesson they learned from me. It was emotional to see how each phase of my life had left a different teaching for them. One of the greatest joys of age is seeing generations succeed one another. I'm very proud when I see my children raising their own children, and now my grandchildren starting their own families. It's like seeing a cycle complete, with each generation adding its own story to the family book. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I look in the mirror and talk to my wrinkles. Each one reminds me of a special moment, the deep crease between my eyebrows, from when I anxiously waited for the birth of my first child, the lines around my mouth, from smiling so much at family parties. Even the spots on my hands tell stories of work, of care, of lived life. As I always tell my grandchildren, aging is a privilege that not everyone has. Each extra day is a gift, a chance to learn something new, to love more, to make a difference in someone's life. And do you know what's most beautiful? Seeing how young people approach when they realize you've embraced your age with grace. The other day, a young customer told me, "Mr. Jack, you make me less afraid of getting older." Because in the end, that's what matters. Not how many years you have, but how you live each one of them. As the old saying my father always repeated goes, "It's not the time that passes through us, we're the ones who pass through time." Today, sitting on the porch of my house, watching the sunset and feeling the bread smell that still comes from the bakery, now run by my son, I realize that life is like a well-prepared recipe. Each ingredient has its purpose, each moment its special flavor. The bakery continues there on the corner of Flower Street, now with a new sign that says Jack's Bakery, since 1980. My eldest son kept the name, saying it was important to preserve the history. Old customers still show up, not just for the bread, but to share memories, to tell their children and grandchildren about Mr. Jack, who made the best bread in the neighborhood. My mornings are calmer now. I still wake up early, a baker's habit doesn't change, but now it's to have coffee calmly, read the newspaper without rush, and mainly to receive the visits that never stop coming. There's always someone wanting advice, an old story, or simply a sincere conversation. The other day, my eldest granddaughter, now 30, asked me what the secret to a happy life was. I smiled and responded, "There's no secret, my dear. It's like making bread. You need simple but fundamental ingredients. You need positivity to raise the dough, active listening to know the right point, good conversations to ferment relationships, humor to make everything lighter, care with appearance to present well, authenticity to give a unique flavor, and acceptance of age to have the experience of knowing the right time for each thing. Elizabeth up in heaven must be proud." We managed to create a family where love and respect are the main ingredients. Our children grew up, had their own children, and now I see our great-grandchildren running through the house, filling everything with joy and noise. And do you know what's most beautiful? How those lessons I learned throughout life continue to be relevant. The way of being positive even on difficult days, the importance of truly listening to people, the value of a good conversation, the power of humor to overcome difficulties, the care with our appearance as a form of self-respect, the courage to be authentic, and the wisdom of accepting each phase of life. Today at 75, I understand that our life is like that bread I always made. It needs time to grow, care to develop, love to turn out well, and in the end, it's meant to be shared. Each wrinkle on my face, each white strand in my hair, each story I carry, are ingredients of this unique recipe that is my life. And so I go on day after day, grateful for each moment, for each person who crosses my path, for each lesson learned. As I always tell my grandchildren, life is like a well-made bread. Even when it comes out a bit crooked, it's still worth savoring each little piece. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's time for my afternoon coffee. I'll go to the bakery to get a hot bread and, who knows, share a few more stories with whoever is there. After all, as that old saying goes, life is not measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away. And so I end this story, not with a period, but with ellipses. Because life, my dears, always continues to surprise us, teach us, and give us opportunities to make a difference in someone's life.